This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
Dr. Carson asked that I show Bayard Rustin's arrival into Montgomery and what he met with the armed guards at the house after the bombing of Dr. King's home at the end of January. As you know, Dr. King says the movement is just very early. So I'm going to do a freeze frame here in time and back up to look at the origins of the Montgomery bus boycott and the role of women in the movement. Most textbooks start with December 1st, the arrest of Rosa Parks. And so I'm going to start there using an oral history from her hearing. And I should share with you, I've been engaged in some research. I came across an oral history of a teenager who was arrested prior to Rosa Parks and became very fascinated by the Montgomery story and the role of teenagers and women. And so I began to look for primary source documents. I looked for court transcripts. I tried to see who was alive that I could find and interview, as well as to examine memoir. And so what I'm going to share with you during today's lecture will be based on that research. On December 1st, the day of Rosa Parks' arrest, it's a Thursday, 1955, and they expedite her hearing to happen that following Monday, December 5th, so that E.D. Nixon can attend. E.D. Nixon is a major player in Montgomery, Alabama. He is the former state president of the NAACP. He is the current Progressive Democratic Association president. And in a few days, at this moment, he becomes the treasurer of the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. He is a Pullman porter. So knowing that he's a Pullman porter, who can you think of that he has ties with that's connected? A. Philip Randolph. He has very close ties to A. Philip Randolph, and he's very involved in union labor organizing. Rosa Parks visits with him when she's free, and she assists him with secretarial duties, as well as Fred Gray, who you'll be learning about today as well. Fred Gray is a new young attorney, 25 years old, and he's right out of law school, and he's driven by the passion to destroy anything segregated. So before he had to leave for his regular route, the trial is held Monday morning. This is an excerpt from that hearing. Originally, Dr. Carson and I thought that we could move this out, but there's still not enough space. I do different reenactments of some of the women. So imagine the context is a courtroom. Rosa Parks. I do. I boarded the bus on December 1st after work, about 6:30 p.m. in Court Square. The bus proceeded out of town, and at the third stop, it immediately filled with white passengers. By the time I boarded the bus, Negroes were already beginning to stand at the back of the car. The driver noted that 2 or 3 gentlemen would be standing, so he turned and he demanded the seat that I and the passenger next to me and the other 2 across the aisle had taken. Now, they very reluctantly gave up their seats, but I refused to do so. He then called officers of the law, and they came and they placed me under arrest. I was bonded and bailed out shortly thereafter. Thank you. At my 30-minute trial, I was found guilty. Fined $10 plus another $4 in court costs. If I didn't pay, 56 days hard labor. We paid, I appealed. But the newspapers got it all wrong. That day my feet didn't hurt. I wasn't any more tired that day than any other day. Just tired of being mistreated. Tired of being treated like a second-class citizen. I and the other 2 teenagers, Mary Louise Smith and Claudette Colvin, we did not disobey the law. I heard a voice from God. He said he was at my side. I've been rebellious all my life when people have mistreated me because of my skin color. I guess the time had finally come. I had just been pushed as far as I could stand to be pushed. So I sat. So it's an excerpt from December 5th, the hearing. The day of her hearing, 500 people are outside the courthouse, including young people, teenagers that are members of the NAACP Youth Council. Mrs. Parks is the director. The Youth Council, angry young teenagers, she's helping them to take the anger and turn it into positive action for social change. December 5th, later that afternoon, a meeting takes place. Business leaders in town, including women, ministers. They form a new organization, which we saw a part of that in the clip last week from Boycott, the HBO series, which is where the clip you just saw came from. They call themselves the Montgomery Improvement Association, and Dr. King is going to be the spokesperson. That night, they have the first mass meeting. Over 6,000 people attend. It's taken place at Holt Street Baptist Church. Okay, I'm going to stop here, put a place mark, and we're going to come back to December. But I want to back up in time. So we're in December, December 5. Go back to March 2nd, 1955. So March 2nd, 1995, a 15-year-old teenager is arrested. Her name, Claudette Colvin. She's a student at Booker T. Washington High School. She has not yet met Mrs. Parks. 2 weeks later, she meets her. Mrs. Parks invites her to come to the youth council to tell her story. In case y'all wondering why I'm standing here, Miss Rosa Parks invited me to come speak to y'all for the youth council meeting. She thought you might be interested in hearing my story because, well, I'm angry like some of y'all. 2 of my teachers been teaching me a lot about standing up for what's right, and that's what I tried to do 2 weeks ago, March 2nd, the day I got arrested. I remember it was March 2nd because, well, it was a week right after Negro History Week. I like Negro History Week a lot because we be learning about colored people who want to make a difference, and that's what I want to do too, make a difference. My teacher, Miss Nesbitt and Miss Lawrence, they teaching us a lot of things. We reading the Constitution and understanding what it means to be a Negro in America. Well, that day, I got on the bus and I paid my dime at the front, and then I got off and I ran to the back door with the rest of the colored kids. That's because the driver might pull off before you get back on if you don't run to the back door. Also, white people don't like us walking down the aisle next to them. I got back on the bus and the white section, it was empty, and the colored section was full, so I sat in the middle section, and I took the last row seat on the left. It was right by the window. I was just sitting in the window looking out, and I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I had a chocolate candy bar. I was eating on that. I didn't know the name of the girl sitting next to me, this older girl, so I just kept looking out the window. The driver went more stops, more people were getting on, black and white. Pretty soon, no more seats were available. "Give me those seats," the driver called out. Colored people just got up. White people started taking the seats, but I just stayed seated. I just stared straight ahead. "Make light on your feet." Girl next to me got up immediately, stood in the aisle. Then the other 2 girls across the aisle, they got up. But I told myself, this is not the restricted area. I'm going to stay seated. Folks started staring at me. You know, white folks. She knows where she belongs. I hope she's not one of them troublemakers. Me? A troublemaker? Just because how I'm born, I'm a troublemaker. You know, I remember this story when I was 8 years old. My daddy, he said, "Roy Rogers is coming to town." My sister and I, we were so excited. Hee-haw! Woo-hoo! Roy Rogers is coming to town. My daddy, he got me this cowboy hat. My sister got some cowboy boots. Hee-haw! Woo-hoo! Huh, Daddy? Yeah, I know it's at the Coliseum. I can't wait Huh, Daddy? We're not going, but you said white kids only, but that's not, why? They think we're troublemakers? I'm not gonna make trouble, I just wanna see the Cowboys. Troublemaker. Just because how we born, we troublemakers. Then I remember I looked out the window and that's when I saw Miss Hamilton, a lady from my neighborhood. She was standing at the next bus stop. She was waiting to get on the bus. Wait! Please, I just paid my dime. Let me get back on. Oh, please. Ooh, I can't walk faster today, my Lord. Oh, hey, Claudette. Sure, I can sit next to you. Whew. Miss Hamilton, lady from my neighborhood, she sat right next to me. The two of you need to get up so I can drive on. They ain't gotta do nothing but stay black and die. That girl, she's right, stay black and die. But wait. I want to stay black and die a natural death. Stay black and die. Look like an old black lady, stay black and die. We die because we black. Segregation is killing black people. Thank God for that fight. You know that big fight, Brown versus Board of Education? So all colored kids can go to good schools. But me, I can't even go to the main library and get a book to read. But our parents paying taxes, right? That's why our youth council, Miss Rosa Parks, she's sending youth in there every day trying to check out books at the main library. Because at the branch library, they got hand-me-down books, pages ripped out, things all inside, nasty stuff written in. We gonna change that law, just wait and see. You know, some people, they gotta work sun up to sundown, sharecropping, stay black and die. Beating and burning, go unnoticed. Rape. They won't talk about it if it's a black lady or a black girl, but if it's a white woman, it's in the TV, radio, newspapers. And then men, colored men, they just come up missing, they get snatched up or lynched. I don't want to die like that. If I could do one thing, just one thing, people can't even get decent job and fair pay. I'm going to step out of her oral history for a moment. Part of this comes from her testimony, court transcripts. I also did 6 interviews with Claudette Colvin, and I wanted to get inside of what was motivation, what were the principles underlying her to take action that day. And so I step in and out of that voice and court transcript voice. She goes on to tell the story. I'm going to pick it up from the bus driver. Now, the two of you need to get up so I can drive on. Sir, I paid my dime, I paid my fare. Now I'm gonna sit right here. I'm pregnant. So I paid my dime too, you know, and it's my constitutional right. In fact, you shouldn't even be asking people, constitutional? Who do you think you are? Let me get the police, I've heard everything. Now, Negroes have constitutional rights. Driver gets off the bus. He flags down a motor cop. Motor cop says, it's not my jurisdiction. He calls it in. 2 officers appear on the scene. He takes the officers to the back door. He describes the situation. That gal, that thing over there, I've had trouble with her before. 2 policemen enter the bus. Now, the 2 of you need to get up. You know it's against the law. Officer, I paid my dime, sir. If I were to move right now, I'd be very sick. I'm pregnant, sir. If there's a man not man enough to get up and give a pregnant lady a seat, I need to throw you in jail. Well, Mr. Harris calls out, you can have my seat, sir. You can have it. I think he was sensing there was going to be trouble. Miss Hamilton, she gets up and she goes to the back of the bus. Officer, I didn't know it was the law that a colored person just had to get up and give a white person their seat when there are no empty seats. That's not what the city ordinance says, sir. Get up, gal! now. No, son, now I paid my dime, I paid my fare, and I know what the city ordinance say. I am not going to be treated like a second-class citizen. I know the law. My teacher taught it at school. Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence. We even studied Patrick Henry's speech, and I know it by heart, so I know the law. You know, my teacher asks us all kind of questions. She prick our mind. She trying to see what we're thinking about. She say, who are you? Sitting right here, who are you? Who are you on the outside, the person that people think they see? Who are you? Who are you on the inside? How you think, how you feel, what you believe? Would you be willing to stand up for what you believe in, even if someone wants to hold you back because you're different? Huh, children? Do you love your beautiful brown skin? Do you? Are you American? What does it mean to be an American? Homework tonight, write me an essay. What does it mean to be an American? You need to know who you are, children. You need to understand that. My teacher, she say we got to know who we are. She say we got to think for ourselves so we can act. She say history, that we can change things, we can choose. That's why we study current events and we study history so we can understand everything going on and we can do something. So say something, somebody. Don't y'all know your right to free speech, the First Amendment? Officer, all I know is I hate Jim Crow. I also know if you ain't got nothing worth dying for, you ain't got nothing worth living for. So you can give me liberty or give me death. Ouch! I don't care. Drag me off of this bus. Take me to jail. I refuse to be treated like a second-class citizen. Next thing I know, they put me in the police car. Forced me. Sir? Then they put handcuffs on me through the window. What's wrong with this black bitch? She ain't nothing but a, let's take her to Atmore State Prison and get rid of her. No, no, no! Next thing I know, I was at City Hall, the adult jail. They didn't even take me to juvenile hall. They took fingerprints and then sir? Then they took me and they put me in this jail, the adult jail. I was there for a couple of hours and then the pastor came and my father. I remember when I went back to school, my teacher, she said, Claudette, I didn't know you were going to go out there and start a revolution, girl. You know, my friends, well, my so-called friends at school, some of them trying to avoid me now. You know what their mama say? Come here. Let me tell you one thing. You know your little friend Claudette Colvin? That girl that got mixed up in a heap of trouble. You stay out of that mess, you hear? Don't let them call you no troublemaker. Hear me? You too. Y'all stay away from her. Here I am, trying to make it right for everybody else, but I feel like I did something wrong. I feel like an outsider. I don't even look people in the eye anymore. And I ain't ever getting on the Montgomery buses again either. About 2 weeks later, they had a hearing. And they had me for violating the segregation code, disorderly conduct, and assault. But then they dropped 2 of the charges and they kept the assault charge. My attorney say he think they were trying to get wind that maybe we wanted to take it to a high court. So they were taking our ammunition away. I got indefinite probation in my parents' care. And it wasn't right because I was standing up to make it right. And I know what the city ordinance say. It say you only have to get up if there's an empty seat to move to. And there wasn't one. That's why Mr. Harris got up so Ms. Hamilton could move in the back. Well, that's what I did. So I'm going to step out of her oral history for a second. Any comments, questions, observations? of the two oral histories you've heard so far? Mm-hmm.
You said that the trial, I'm going back to his summary for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You said that the trial was expedited so that E.D., what's his last name?
Nixon.
E.D. Nixon could be there. But why did they allow that to happen? Why did they allow somebody to do it?
E.D. Nixon was very powerful in Montgomery. As I stated before, he was the former NAACP state chapter president, president now of the Progressive Democratic Association. He had ties in with whites in power, including the editor of the Montgomery Advertiser, Joe Asbell. And he could call in on favors. Okay? E.D. Nixon is really key because he's one of the masterminds in thinking of, let's take this through the court system. Whereas the women, the approach was through the boycott. And so we begin to see the two ideas merge. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
How did they charge her for assault?
Good question. You know, there is sometimes no logic in what happens in regards to sentencing. Just like now, as if we look at the Gina 6 and what's happening in harsher punishments. Supposedly, Mrs. Colvin was resisting when they first began to, well, when they first took her off the bus, she kind of went limp with her body. But when she saw the police car, she was very frightened because in her community in King Hill, when black men come, or when policemen come to take black men and put them in cars, sometimes they come up missing, they come back beaten up, they're left places. And when they were in the car and they began to threaten her with Atmore State Prison, she knew that that wasn't right, that she was supposed to go to juvenile hall, and maybe something is amiss here. What she said in the interview that I've not included in the performance, because sometimes I'm at schools, is that inside of the police station, she's a big busted woman. Let's see if this, no, you can't tell in this one, but as a child, she had begun to develop. And the men, policemen in the station, began to talk about her chest size. And she said that she was terrified. And when she got down into the cell, that not only did she pray and promise God that she would never do anything wrong again and do all the chores that anyone would ask of her, that to occupy her mind, to keep from hearing the fear, the worry, or what was being said to her earlier, that she recited all the poems that she could ever remember studying that she had committed to memory until her father and the minister arrived. Any other questions? Shall I continue? Yes? Okay. So what date were we on at that point? Or approximately? So March 2nd is the day of her arrest. 2 weeks after the arrest, she has the opportunity to meet Mrs. Clark. She joins the youth council and goes to meetings. Mrs. Parks. Did I say Clark? Yeah. Thank you. I'm working on another script and there's a Mrs. Clark. But Mrs. Parks. Let's see here. So I'm going to, I'll share one other thing that's important in the timeline and the chronology. Also, in March, there is an election campaign going on. And the whites that are running run on a segregationist ticket. And there are 4 key questions that they ask. And pretty much the questions are, do you believe in segregation? Do you believe in segregation of the Negro? Do you believe that Negroes should not get the vote? And if the candidates answer outside of holding down the status quo of segregation, they're not even interested in a political platform. Okay. I'm going to jump to August of 55. What do you know about August 1955? So before I go to that event, I think I'll talk about a place. Have you heard of Highlander Folk School? Have we talked about it? I can't recall. In this class? I should say more? Yes? Okay. Talk to me. Oh, thank you. Okay. So Highlander Folk School is in Tennessee. It was started by a man by the name of Myles Horton in 1932. And the Horton, Myles with a Y, Horton. Myles Horton searched throughout the United States looking for a model to build this institution on. He said that schools had not done their jobs in preparing the citizenry to deal with the problems in their own communities. And so he ended up traveling all the way to Scandinavia and building the Highlander folk school model on a school in Scandinavia. The beginning work was around labor and labor organizing. And at that time, the textiles and mills were the biggest industries. As things became more volatile in the South, the focus of the work moved towards human and civil rights issues. And there have been 3 different schools. Highlander School still exists. It's still in Tennessee. It's not at its original site. It's been burned down, shut down. They've tried to seize the property. They were labeled as Reds and communist, anything to stop the work, because all of the meetings were interracial meetings. What was unique and still is unique about Highlander Folk School, all the meetings take place in a circle, and they start very organically, where people introduce themselves, their name, the communities they're from, and what issues are going on. And from that, this incredible conversation emerges, but also what are the possible ways of tackling these problems. He believed that the answers are all inside of us. It's just a matter of having that opportunity to talk and to troubleshoot and to learn from each other. And he would make the commitment to find the resources to help with the work. So I'm going to just back up for 1 second into 54. We'll go back to 1954. Septima Clark. Do you know of Septima Clark? Septima Clark is a school teacher in South Carolina. And when she joins the NAACP, she is threatened that if she does not drop the membership, that she will not only be fired, that she will lose her pension. Now, why would that be such a threat in 1954? What do we know about the NAACP thus far?
Well, they're fighting in the courtrooms to end segregation at that time.
Okay. And
appealing cases in the South.
okay. And would you remember when we were talking about around World War II and coming up through the Depression? They were fighting racial violence as well, and the lynchings that were going on and investigating them. I don't know if you remember from one of the film clips, outside of their office in New York City, there was a flag hanging, and it changed every day, and it announced the number of lynchings that took place on that day. You may also remember their fight in the Scottsboro case, okay, with the Anti-Defamation. So, Septima Clark is visited by Myles Horton in 54. Because she doesn't drop the membership, she's fired. And so the only work that she can get is by traveling to the Georgia-Carolina Islands. And she's working with what people would call the peasantry class, the people who provide the service in the homes, crossing over into Charleston and into Georgia by ferry. She decides to create a curriculum. And that curriculum she starts with, because many people can't even write their names. So she has people tell them their names, she writes the names on the chalkboard, and from the names begins to teach the alphabet and early literacy. And from there, also she's preparing them by using small excerpts from the Constitution, because part of the voter registration test is to be able to interpret the Constitution. She also helps or teaches people how to fill out mail order catalogs as a part of her curriculum. I'm going to ask you to take a stab at why do you think this is a part of the curriculum? What is she doing? Yeah.
She's teaching them to fill out forms.
Okay.
And it's probably one of the only ways that they could get forms without arousing suspicion.
Okay. So you're at the scratch of the surface, but she's doing something more powerful. if you analyze it, a mail order catalog allows you to do what? So that if you're thinking that the majority of the people are living under sharecropping, and do you understand that what sharecropping is, that you're constantly indebted to the people that you work for, and sometimes borrowing or getting things on credit because you're being underpaid, and many times the figures change, and if you challenge that, it can become a very violent situation, or you can lose work. So by being able to fill out a mail order catalog allows you to have economic power to shop where you choose and please, and possibly to bypass or to not support the segregation system that you're living under in that particular community. Okay? Myles Horton hears about the work that she's doing, and he comes to witness it, and he's blown away, and he says, I have to get you to come to Highlander and to do this work here, and I'll find the money. And possibly we can create a model and do it in our 8 southern states. And he does. So she can't believe that this white man is interested, that he's promising support, and that he's invited her to come and to stay for 2 weeks. She goes. She's amazed at the work that he's doing and his level of commitment. And she goes back in '55. That's important to note because Mrs. Parks, on the behalf of a friend in Montgomery, Alabama, a white woman by the name of Virginia Dorr. And Virginia Dorr is married to Clifford Dorr. Clifford Dorr, like Thurgood Marshall and a team of other attorneys that are working at this time, he's one of the top trained attorneys in the United States as well. Worked under the Roosevelt administration, but got caught up in the witch hunt of the McCarthyism and labeled a red. And so he's come to Montgomery very quietly to settle and to take care of his family and to escape that. He secretly is supporting the blacks in that community. He is advising young Fred Gray, the attorney who's right out of high school, but he has asked that his name be kept from any of this being made public. Virginia Dorr writes a letter to Myles Horton. She talks about Rosa Parks and the work that she's doing with the Youth Council, the first elected secretary in their regional office, and says that she wants to work on a segregation plan, a desegregation plan for the schools. And can you find money for her to come, a scholarship? And he finds the money. Ms. Park goes to Highlander, spends 2 weeks there. She meets Septima Clark, and I have a photograph image of her. And she says, for the first time in my life, I meet a black woman besides my mama that I can look up to and learn from. And they began this friendship. I want to read to you some words that came out of an interview from Mrs. Parks. What I did was I took the primary source material, I wrote it in the form of a letter without changing the content because I want to also provide some background information. But let me just back up before I share that. So at the very end of meetings at Highlander, they go around one by one and they ask you, what will you do when you get back home? And so Ms. Park shares, first of all, let me say I've been deeply moved by this workshop retreat. Getting to know each and every one of you and learning about your struggles and your communities has inspired me, as well as seeing that there are many whites here learning how to organize and fight racism. Experiencing Highlander Folk School is like a microcosm of a racially integrated society. I found out for the first time in my adult life that this could be a unified society, that there is such a thing as people of different races and backgrounds meeting together in workshops and living together in peace and harmony. I don't expect things to improve in Montgomery. Negroes are timid. They won't act. But I'm going to work on a plan to desegregate our schools, and I'm going to continue my work with the NAACP Youth Council, helping them to understand their anger and how to turn it into action. And Septima Clark, you've opened my eyes. I can now see the routine indignities that have been inflicted upon colored folks some 90 years after emancipation. I've gained the strength to persevere in my freedom work. And Mr. Horton, I'm in it for the long haul. Thank you for inviting me here. So it had a very profound effect on her, experiencing this microcosm of what society could be like if we lived in an integrated world where there was peace and harmony trying to be achieved, the beloved community that King talks about. When she goes home, 2 weeks after her arrival, an incident happens, an abduction and a murder of a child. Do you know who I'm speaking of? Okay. So, 14-year-old Emmett Till leaves Chicago. Is there anyone who doesn't know the story of Emmett Till? Should I spend more time? Okay. So Emmett Till lives in Chicago. His mother is putting him on a train to go down south to Mississippi to visit his uncle, Mose Wright. And she says, boy, I'm going to miss you. Give me that watch you got on your arm. Give it here. Give me something to remember you by. Now you listen here. I want you to mind when you get down there. You hear it's different than up here in Chicago. And if somebody walking towards you, a white person, you step off the sidewalk. You hear me? Or better yet, you cross the street. You hear me, Emmett? I'm going to miss you, boy. I see you soon. You mine. And she puts him on the train. 2 weeks after that, Mrs. Mamie Till had to go down to identify her son's body. The skull had been crushed. The eyes had been gouged out. A bullet shot through his brain. And a 75-pound cotton gin fan had been barbed wired into his neck. Now, if they've done the murder and all of that beating, why would they then take the body, wrap it up in tarp, and throw it into the Tallahatchie River? No body? You can't prove that a murder has taken place. Ms. Park says she believes it was by the grace of God that that body came floating up. A fisherman discovers the body. The sheriff is called. A ring that he had on his finger with initials E.T. that his father had given him. They didn't think there would be a trial. During this time, money is raised in the white community. Even though the two men who had been identified, although there were believed to be maybe 7 or 8 people in 2 trucks that night who had came and took him away, they had signed written confessions. They had been eyewitness identified, but released, not guilty. In between that time during the trial, $10,000 had been collected by people, store owners, merchants, put in jars, like big pickle jars, mayonnaise jars on counters, and people donating money to protect them. Mrs. Parks said that his death couldn't be in vain. Jet magazine, because of Mrs. Till wanting the world to see what was happening to black men in the South, and the Chicago Defender were allowed to take the photograph of him in an open casket. The NAACP had to investigate the violence. They said this was the 3rd racial violence resulting in death in a 2-month period, and the Justice Department would not get involved. The response from the President's office was that it was not a kidnapping that took place across state lines. That was the first response. So this is important to note because it has an international impact when the image and the story travels across the wires.
What state are we in?
Chicago, Illinois, and then Mississippi. Mr. Mose Wright was the first African-American man in the state of Mississippi to testify in a court of law against whites.
What was his name?
Mose Wright. He was 64 years old. People had to be secretly put into the trunks of their cars or into caskets to be taken out of town to keep them safe until it was time for the trial. The trial is witnessed by Congressman Diggs, who comes from back east. And if you get a chance to see episode 1 on Eyes on the Prize, The Awakening, you can actually see courtroom footage and hear him reflecting on what happened when he got to the court and how they didn't want to allow him to enter, even though he had written the judge ahead of time. I'm going to move forward now from August. You see why August is very important? You have Mrs. Clark's at Highlander Folk School, meeting Septima Clark, kind of being politicized and her consciousness being raised even more so. And I don't want to say that that was the only thing, because Mrs. Parks, with her husband, worked secretly raising money for the Scottsboro case. You know, she was very well aware and connected to what was happening in different parts of the country and working with A. Philip Randolph. October 21st. October 21st is how soon before Mrs. Parks' arrest? Just a month and a half. Okay, so we have a time frame. Another teenager, 18-year-old Mary Louise Smith. Mary Louise Smith goes to St. Jude School. Her mother has passed away. Her father is raising 5 children. She works part-time to help out. She has an older sister who had to drop out of school to work. Mary Louise Smith gets on the bus. So I got on the bus, right? I paid my dime at the front, and then I got off and had to run to the back door because that driver wouldn't wait for anybody. I remember I sat in the middle section and I was behind the colored sign. I was minding my own business and I was thinking about my boss lady. She forgot to pay me last week and she had called and said, I got your money, come on by, Mary Louise. And I'm thinking, I hope she's there. Last time she forgot and ran an errand, she said. All of a sudden, this lady, this white lady, she's standing all over me, all impatient like. She said, get up, gal. I said, ma'am, it's this driver's job to ask and ask politely. Driver, could you please ask this heifer to get up? Heifer, you better get out of my face, you white heifer. Nigga, do I need to take you to jail? No, sir. Please, sir, I got a right to sit here. I got a privilege like everybody else do. Next thing I know, the driver, he's driving the bus to jail. Mary Louise is taken in. She goes through her mugshots, fingerprints. Her father comes to get her, and she begs him not to tell anyone. I don't want to be publicly humiliated. Please don't tell anybody. So not until after Mrs. Parks' arrest does the committee find out that she had been arrested in October. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is this. I'm going to stop again at December 5th. I'm going to jump back into 54 and then to 1949 before I go to 56 towards the end of the boycott. I'm going to try something with you. I have a document, a very important document, and I'm going to put you in roll. You ready? You ready? I'm glad you're here. You are my award-winning journalist. We have won more awards with this newspaper than any paper in this nation. Now, I got this document. It's a fax. No one's seen it yet. And there's so much information in here, new evidence that allows us to go back down to Montgomery, Alabama, and to do some research so we can tell a story that's not been told. It's 50 years later, and they're still giving us the myth of Rosa Parks' tired feet. So, as I read this document, if there's evidence that you think we need to investigate, say stop, and we'll talk about what we need to do about that evidence, okay? We'll pose questions of it where we might be able to get some answers. You ready? You know when to say stop? When? Evidence, okay? Because we're going to think like historians do. We look for the latest and best evidence that's available to us. And then we're going to try to find as many different perspectives, witnesses, to get closer to a truth. So this is written May 21st, 1954. Anything significant about that date?
It's 4 days after.
Aha, that's why I pay you the big bucks. Right after Brown versus Board. So maybe there's some hope on the heels of Board to get some more action done. It's written to a Mayor Gale of Montgomery, Alabama. Dear Sir, The Women's Political Council is very grateful to you and the city commissioners for the hearing you allowed our representatives during the month of March 1954.
What was the hearing for?
Good, good, good. Any other questions we need to ask so far? What was the hearing for?
More
You said something about March, but I didn't catch the rest.
You said March or May?
March.
March, so why March?
So was there anything significant about the
Yeah.
date in March happening of 54? Any other questions? Hmm?
How did they help? You said thank you for your help, but how did they help?
How did they help? Did they help? Anything else? Think about your 5 W's. Who was there? Yes? Anything else? I'll read it one more time. I don't want you to miss anything. The Women's Political Council is very grateful to you and the city commissioners for the hearing you allowed our representatives during the month of March 1954 when the city bus fare increase case was being reviewed.
What city? Like, where is this taking place?
Where is it taking place?
Who's a member of the women's political?
Can you say it again?
Who's a member of the women's political?
Who is a member of the Women's Political Council? What are they about? Anything else? Shall I keep going? Hold on to these questions. See if they get answered or if we generate more questions. There were several things the council asked for. This is the Women's Political Council. 1, a city law that would make it possible for Negroes to sit from back toward front and whites from front toward back until all the seats are taken. 2, that Negroes not be asked or forced to pay fare at the front and then go to the rear of the bus to re-enter. And 3, that buses stop at every corner in residential sections occupied by Negroes as they do in communities where whites reside. Anything to investigate?
What is the current seating policy?
Aha. Anything else?
What does the bus schedule look like? Where does it go?
Aha, what does the bus schedule look like? How often are they stopping and where? What's the distance in the white community compared to the black community? Yes? Any?
What sparked this? Like, was there an incident that sparked them wanting these demands, or is this just the raising of the time?
Have they raised this before? Did something significant raise this? Who are they to raise it? Women. Shall I keep going? We are happy to report that buses have been stopping at more corners now in some sections where Negroes live than previously. However, the same practices in seating and boarding the bus continue.
What are those practices?
Can you hear?
What are those practices?
Okay, what are those practices? Anything else?
What section?
What section? Should we talk about the buses? So the buses are broken up into 3 different sections. The front section that everyone speaks of, the whites only section, there are 10 seats reserved. Imagine, if you will, if this is the driver's seat, like buses today, there's that seat that faces this way instead of straight ahead, and another seat. They imagine that 3 bottoms could sit on both of those seats. So now we have how many seats? 6. And then the very first row facing 2 and 2. How many seats? There you have our 10 reserved seats, whites only, okay? Then the middle of the bus begins that second row facing forward. So now we have 4, which means 2 can sit per seat, 8. We have 16. 16 seats designated for the middle section, also known as no man's land. Also sometimes said first come, first serve. Do you remember what Claudette Colvin said? What ordinance did she cite? What did she say?
You only have to get up if there are no empty seats.
The ordinance says you only have to get up if there is an empty seat to go to. What ordinance? Back in 1900, there was a boycott, the trolley. And this was one of the negotiations, that you only had to get up if there is an empty seat to move to.
What happens if, let's say, there are more white people in the bus and they have to sit in the black section. And if more black people come,
Good question. So let's hold that and let me give you the back section and come back to this question. So we have the front, we have the middle, and then the back. So in the back, we have the back door where people enter. In front of that door, we have a seat facing forward. We have the seat that faces this way, and then we have this seat here, right? And then opposite, we have another seat. That makes up our 10 reserved for Negroes. But the question on the table is,
there are more whites in the bus.
so if more whites are on the bus, what happens?
They are already sitting, they feel their spot, they feel the normal land, and then now they feel the black ones.
Okay,
But somehow the blacks came, a lot of black people came in.
okay.
So do they have a claim on their spot by kicking the whites to go forward?
I'm going to give you, yes. I'm going to let you hear from the mayor. And also I'm going to tell you about a sign, because see, these seats got contested all the time because of the ambiguity about the law. The city ordinance says you could get up. You didn't have to get up if there was not an empty seat to move to, but the state statute said the driver has final authority to assign seats. Actually, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to read you something from the state and city ordinance, what were the laws on the books, but also wanted to tell you there's a sign, a placard, sometimes a little wooden sign that could hang on the back of a seat, and the driver could move it, move it, move it. If I decided I wanted to reserve the middle section and the white section for whites, because I know when I get to that part of town, I could make blacks stand over empty seats. How much bus fare were they paying? Both parties. Okay? State law. So I think I'm going to read Title 48, Section 301. Operators of passenger stations and carriers authorized to segregate white and colored races. All passenger stations in this state operated by or for the use of any motor transportation company shall be authorized to provide separate waiting rooms, facilities, or space, or separate ticket windows for the white and colored races, but such accommodations for the races shall be equal. All motor transportation companies and operators of state or interstate passengers are authorized and empowered to provide separate accommodations on each vehicle for the white and colored races. So I'm going to stop there. Okay, so you're supposed to provide something for both. And then one last thing that I want to share is that some bus drivers, based on the city law section 11, same power of person in charge of vehicle, passengers to obey directions. Any employee in charge of a bus operated in the city shall have the power of a police officer of the city while in actual charge of any bus, for the purpose of carrying out the provisions of the preceding section, and it shall be unlawful for any passenger to refuse or fail to take a seat among those assigned to the race of which he belongs at the request of any such employee in charge. So Mrs. Parks, as well as Mary Louise Smith, when the driver asked them to get up, they were defying the state law because they have the final authority. Okay? Now, I'm going to hear the mayor and then back to Joan Robinson's letter. So there are a series of negotiation meetings that begin to take place starting December 8th. December 5th was Mrs. Parks' hearing that Monday. That was also the first day of the one-day bus boycott. At the mass meeting that took place that night at 7 p.m., 6,000 people in attendance. The entire church is full, the balcony is full, the side yard, the backyard, and for 3 blocks outside the church, people are standing, cars are double parked. At the end of this meeting, and the meeting was held, 1, to celebrate the success of the one-day bus boycott, 2, to figure out what to do next because people were tense and violence could jump off any moment. 3, there were 2 resolutions that had been written, and they are in the pockets. I think of Ralph Abernathy at this moment. 1, based on the attendance and how many people actually came out and supported the bus boycott in the meeting, says, let's continue the boycott. The other, based on if the attendance was not so strong or depending on what they read from the crowd, says we're going to call off the boycott, but we will use it as a threat for negotiations with the powers that be, the commissioners. Very important. So by the end of the meeting, when they asked, should we continue, the people jumped to their feet, unanimous decision to continue the bus boycott if, based on King's speech and his wishes, that it remained Christian, nonviolent, and legal. Christian, nonviolent, and legal.
How can a boycott be illegal?
There was an ordinance, an old ordinance on the books that went back to 1921 that said you could not have a boycott if it didn't have a just cause. And this becomes a point of contention when Bayard Rustin comes in, and so they switch the language and they begin to call it a protest, that it's not a boycott but a protest. Okay, now let me pull out the mayor's voice very quickly and get back to it.
Unconstitutional anyway, like how can you tell someone that they can't? Or, that's like coercion.
Based on the right to do what?
Unconstitutional based on the right to, I mean, go ahead.
Free assembly?
Yeah, free assembly or,
No, I mean like,
it's also a form of free speech too, like boycotting it.
But is there logic in some of the segregation laws and what they're able to get away with unless it's challenged?
Yeah, I guess. I wouldn't say logic, I would say it's strategic.
Okay.
Yeah.
But meaning how sometimes we try to make sense of, well, how can they do that? Monday morning we have the hearing, Mrs. Parks, found guilty. They pay the $10 and the $4 court cost. That afternoon the special meeting takes place. Business leaders, men, women, ministers, and they form a new organization to become the leaders of the boycott. And that new name is Montgomery Improvement Association. And Reverend King is chosen to be the spokesperson for that group. They plan and figure out their 3 demands, and they plan the format for the evening meeting. And they also decide that we need to get committees together to run this boycott, one of which being a transportation committee if we're not going to depend on the buses. Rufus Lewis becomes one of the leaders because they have 2 or 3 different ones for the transportation committee. What I should tell you is that I'm looking for, and I'm almost there, here we are. So I'm going to share these words with you, and also I'll tell you that December 8th they have the first negotiation meeting, and they realize it's a matter of days before the carpool system will be up and running. The carpool system will consist of volunteer cars, people driving their own cars, but soon checks begin to flow in from all around the world, people sending money to help buy used cars or new cars. The churches will own them because they're protected because of their nonprofit status, and they call them rolling churches. They end up having 325 cars in that carpool system, and they have 43 pickup stations and 42 drop-off stations that run from 5 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. Here they are. And starting off running every 15 minutes, and then by 10 o'clock in the morning running every hour on the hour until about 3, and then again every 15 minutes, and then slowing it down again in the evening time to accommodate people working on different shifts. So we left off in the letter where?
After you stated the demands that were met, were asked of, and then how they were sorted.
Okay, so here's her next sentence. Now we don't know much about the Women's Political Council yet, right? Mayor Gale, 3/4 of the writers of these public conveniences are Negroes. Where is she going?
economically.
Economically. Okay, that's the thinking. Where's she going with it? She just gonna put it on the table? She gonna threaten him? This is a woman, 1954, 5 days after Brown versus Board has been announced. Mayor Gale, 3/4 of the riders of these public conveniences are Negroes. If Negroes did not patronize them, they could not possibly operate. More and more of our people are already organizing, arranging with neighbors and friends to ride, then be insulted and humiliated by bus drivers. There has been talk from 25 or more local organizations of planning a citywide bus boycott. Bam. What's the date of the document? May 54. How early is it before the boycott begins? 9 months? More than a year? Year and a half early.
How did she get that information?
Huh? How did she get the information?
Yeah, what's she like?
Interesting question. The question implies she could not have created the information. Yes? How did she get the information? How does she know? Could she be the spearhead of it? Is she the secretary reporting on it? Is she a committee member in on the discussion?
This is in Montgomery, or
This is in Montgomery.
did the boycott idea originate from the Women's Council?
Oh. Could women have thought up the boycott and planned it and executed it? Let's keep going. So what was that last sentence? There has been talk from 25 or more local organizations of planning a citywide boycott of buses. I'm going to skip to the second to last paragraph. Many of our southern cities and neighboring states have practiced the policies we seek without incident whatsoever. Atlanta, Macon, and Savannah in Georgia have done this for years. Even Mobile in our own state does this, and all the passengers are satisfied. Now I would ask the question, how does she get that information? How does she know what's happening in 5 other cities?
She must be well connected with the organizers of this.
She must be well connected.
Maybe the Women's Council was in those locations.
Maybe the Women's Council. The WPC was formed for the purpose of inspiring Negroes to live above mediocrity, to elevate their thinking, to fight juvenile and adult delinquency, to register and vote, and in general to improve their status as a group. We were woman power, organized to cope with any injustice, no matter what, against the darker sect. But sometimes I've seen it in biographies that it was a civic organization and that's it. So you hear their mission, what they were about. I should also say that a rape had taken place of a black woman. 2 white police officers were implicated in the rape. The minister who was in town before Reverend King came to take the position that he left, Reverend Vernon Johns, took the woman to a different town to be treated, and he brought it up to the police department. And so one thing that's not said there that you'll find in some documents was that if we cannot protect ourselves, then who can? When Mary Fairbanks steps down from being the president, the next president of the Women's Political Council is Joan Robinson. She came to town to teach, to be an English professor at Alabama State College from Ohio. She was very well educated, master's degree. She's a member at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church gets a new minister later. That new minister is Reverend King. He doesn't come there until September of '54. How late after her letter has been written? Okay? So, King is not involved. Remember, Dr. Carson said that this was a movement that was going to happen and King may or may not have been the leader if he would have stayed or left. Okay? The momentum had begun. In 1949, she came to teach. She got there in August. In December, just before the holiday break, she decided to go home and see family in Ohio. She decided that she would leave her car in the garage at the college so she wouldn't have to worry about it. and where to park it and take the bus to the airport. She boarded the bus, she paid her money, and she sat down. She remembered there were two other people on the bus, a white woman and an older black gentleman in the back. Closed her eyes, and she was just thinking about going home and the holidays, good cooking, and she remembers hearing a voice, and it sounded agitated and loud, and next thing she knew, it sounded like it was standing next to her, and she looked, and the driver had his fist pulled back in her face, saying, "Gal, if you don't get up, I'm gonna get up! Get on out of here!" And she jumped, terrified. She had heard about the buses, but she didn't really know. She ran down the middle of the aisle as she had come to the door, and she pushed, and it wouldn't open, and she pushed again, and he's walking down the aisle still screaming, fist raised, and she gets out, tears running down her face, running down the sidewalk, humiliated. I felt like an animal over a bus seat. My God. School children go through this every day. Work women and men. My car, my salary allows me to drive to and from work as I please. I had no idea. And she vows to take a stand, no matter rich or poor, to make a difference. She starts a bus complaint campaign, documenting, interviewing, asking the WPC to take it on, that we have to change this. People ride the buses every day. If we could change this, it's a beginning point. So her motivation was personal when she had a face-to-face encounter. So that takes us to 1949. They began documenting the bus complaints about that time, and they continued all the way up until you have that letter. Now, remember when we stopped at December? The day of Rosa Parks' arrest, December 1st. What time was she arrested? After work, about 6:30. News travels like a wildfire. Rosa Parks has been arrested. This is the third case, the second case since Claudette Colvin. She gets on the phone. She calls the WPC members. It's time. This will go on as long as we allow it to go on. I've already written the language for the leaflet. As soon as I get Fred Gray on the phone, I'm going to run the duplication of the leaflets. Finally, about 11 o'clock at night, she gets Fred Gray on the phone. He's been out of town. He knows the story already. "Joanne, are you sure? Are we ready? Can we pull it off?" "Yes, we can. We're ready. The time is ripe." She calls the man who has the keys to the duplicating room at Alabama State College. No one must know. She calls two of her trusted students. No one must know. By midnight, they're there in the duplicating room on a mimeograph machine from midnight until 4 in the morning. 17,500 leaflets. Cut them into thirds, 52,500 leaflets. They bundle them, put them in the cars, the trunks. Then from 4 until 7 in the morning, they have maps on walls, maps on the floors, maps on tables, planning distribution routes, drop-off points. She calls the WPC members, the telephone tree, where they're going to pick them up, and then they will distribute them. The network is in place. By 8 o'clock, with a few minutes to spare, no sleep, she gives 2 lectures back to back. Then her and the 2 students hop in her car. They drive all over town. First stop, public schools. Teachers give it to the students, students take it home, give it to the parents, parents give it to the neighbor. Next stop, any place colored people work. Factories, beauty shops, barber shops, stores, you name it. Pool halls, bars, juke joints, churches, mortuaries. Workers pass it on, neighbors pass it. Don't tell anyone where you got it from. By 3 o'clock, she's back at the college giving her afternoon lecture. not even missed. E.D. Nixon gets on the phone. He calls Joe Asbell, Montgomery advertiser. I got a story so juicy, you gotta run it. He writes, secret meeting to take place Monday night, Holt Street Baptist Church, 7 o'clock. Puts it in the paper because people believe it's true if it's in print. They call the ministers, have a meeting, preach it up on Sunday morning. People gotta have the courage and the faith to do it. Tell them why it's important. Give them the faith of a mustard seed. So come Monday morning, the buses are empty because of that infrastructure, that network, the communication that passed, and the work that had begun by the Women's Political Council starting back in 1949. So to answer your question, how could she get that information? Do you know the answer now?
I understand that now.
Yeah? What's the answer, everybody?
She's source of the information.
Okay. December 8th, they have their first negotiation meeting. The city officials dig their heels in. Who are they to tell us what to do? You remember what their 3 demands were?
And the bus from back to, no, for the bus from back to front, but filling the seats first come, first served.
Okay, has anybody analyzed that? What is that demand all about?
It's like a compromise.
Say more.
It's not as radical as it could be. I mean, it's not.
How radical could it be?
First come, first served.
Hmm?
First come, first served from the front of the bus.
And?
Everyone first come, first served.
And you don't have to get up, right? They were asking for polite segregation until they got a letter. Now, the letter came from Roy Wilkins in the NAACP, and he said, we don't have the manpower or the resources to take up your cause if you're asking for polite segregation. We have a case in South Carolina that's asking for full integration. That was at the end of December of '55. 3 more negotiation meetings happen, and what they discover is that instead of negotiating and moving forward, a hate campaign has been initiated by the commissioners. By the end of the month, King's home is bombed. The KKK is marching in their robes up and down the street. Bricks have come in through some windows. Some cars are finding things stuffed in their gas tanks, bananas, sugar, balloons with urine, water, rotten potatoes, eggs thrown at people walking. At the end of the clip, when Daddy King says it's becoming a race war. King's home is bombed at the end of January. And they realize we have nothing to lose. We have to ask for full integration. A new case is filed February 1st, 1956 by Fred Gray, challenging the constitutionality of segregated seats on the Montgomery buses. Claudette Colvin, 15-year-old, arrested March 2nd, 55. Claudette Colvin, I wanted to end with her, maybe I can just read a little snippet. C-O-L-V-I-N, but the southern pronunciation sounds like C-A-L-L, Colvin, C-O-L-V-I-N.
Is it Septima Clark?
Yes, or Septima. Claudette Colvin, Mary Louise Smith, the 2 teenagers, become plaintiffs in the new case. 2 other women also that you should know. Aurelia Browder, B-R-O-W-D-E-R. Aurelia Browder, the case is named after her, Browder versus Gale, Mayor Gale. And Susie McDonald. There was a 5th plaintiff, Jeanette Reese, but she worked as a domestic for a woman married to a police officer And when they got wind, because people did question the domestics that worked with them, and they would use coercion, manipulation, and fear, when they got wind that she was a part of the case, they challenged her on it, and Fred Gray got her to drop out of the case and then charged him with falsely representing someone who was not a part of the case. So they actually try to get a conspiracy case going, and they do against King. But I'm going to try to do 2 quick readings to end on. I was looking to share with you a response from the police and the commissioners, the people who were in charge in Montgomery. This was a press conference, a part of a press conference on January 1856, a part of that hate campaign that began out of the negotiation meetings. The second one took place a week later. This is Clyde Sellers. Clyde Sellers is Commissioner of Public Affairs. He oversees the police and the fire department. Okay. I, Clyde Sellers, Commissioner of Public Affairs, overseeing the police and fire department of Montgomery, am announcing my Get Tough policy to force boycotters back to the buses. I'm instructing the Montgomery Police Department to break up congregations of Negroes who have been loitering in white residential districts. A person has the right to wait for a ride, but the practice of 6 to 8 Negroes huddling together for periods of time will not be tolerated. And furthermore, the Commission will not allow the Negro to destroy the transportation system of Montgomery. A number of businessmen have promised me that they're going to lay off Negro employees who are being used as NAACP instruments in this boycott. He ends the press conference by publicly joining the White Citizens Council. The White Citizens Council was like the Klan, but they wore business suits. A lot of power. The mayor, the week later, who also joined the White Citizens Council, stated, I'm personally fed up with biracial meetings. There will be no more discussion between whites and Negroes until the latter are ready to end the boycott. We have pussyfooted around with this boycott long enough. On the one hand, white people do not care whether Negroes ride the buses ever again. On the other hand, in an effort to make them ride, I'm urging white Montgomeryans to halt the practice of using your cars as taxis for Negro maids and cooks who work for you. Negroes are laughing at you behind your backs while you chauffeur them around. Any aid whites give to help carry Negroes even 1 block helps the boycott. And cease paying your Negro maids and cooks and nurses blackmail money, extra weekly transportation fare. We are not going to have be a part of a program that will get Negroes back to the buses at the destruction of our heritage and our way of life. I'm convinced beyond any doubt that every right-thinking white man and woman in Montgomery is solidly behind the commissioners in our stand. So you see what they were up against. And then Claudette Colvin, very last words. This is her reflecting back. The day when I refused to give up that bus seat, I should say she was the star witness in the case. Fred Gray, the attorney, says that on the heels of Brown versus Board, with the 14th Amendment and Claudette Colvin's testimony, he believes they won. That day when I refused to give up the bus seat, I knew I could get arrested. The bus driver and the police thought it was about a bus seat. It wasn't. It was about Jim Crow, segregation. It was about life. It was about standing up and changing things, not staying in my place. One of the greatest weapons that we have in America is the weapon of protest. I refused to be a bystander, a silent witness. I didn't want to participate that way. Be nice to be recognized. I just want my baby to know that his mother stood up for something. I'm as anonymous as Miss Rosa Parks is famous. I'm a footnote in history. Just as well, Mary Louise and me are not the symbol of the bus boycott. Everybody can't be a hero or a heroine, but all of us can stand up for something. We walked 13 months, 56 weeks, 381 days. Our feet were tired, but our souls rested. We were the foot soldiers, the walking people, ordinary people who did an extraordinary thing. 50,000 colored Montgomeryans and whites that stood with us. We didn't do it to sit next to white people on the bus. We did it for full class citizenship, for our humanity, and for our love of democracy. Can I give you 4 bullets? You should know this if this is a question, I think. What was the significance of the Montgomery bus boycott in advancing democracy? Powerless people transform themselves through direct action. Never before in this country's history did we have a citywide boycott, okay? So powerless people transform themselves through direct action. 2, the Women's Political Council stages a successful one-day bus boycott. 3, the Black church leads as a spiritual, political, and a social institution. The National NAACP recommends full integration versus polite segregation. That gives them the case, the Supreme Court case. And MLK is nurtured and shaped, and he's inspired by the boycott. There's a symbiotic relationship. The people lift him up, and he inspires them to keep going. And that this grassroots initiative and civil disobedience leads to a just law.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.